Hey, Peter.
Hey, man.
I'm super tweaking right now.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Can barely talk.
Yeah. What are you tweaking on?
Coffee.
Okay.
I'm Adam Maness,
And I'm Peter Martin.
and you're listening to the You'll Hear It podcast.
Daily jazz advice, fully caffeinated.
Oh my gosh.
Fully caffeinated.
Buddy, I'm starting to shake.
I know, but then I noticed you're like, go make some more coffee as well. Aren't you there already?
Yeah, Sam's making coffee right now.
Okay.
Yeah, for our listeners who don't know, we usually record a block of these. We don't sit down. Oh, sorry.
They think it's every day,
Oh,
man.
man. No. We record a block, and you're leaving town soon, so we're trying to record a big block of these.
Yeah,
we
we're
have
doing
a lot
100. We're doing 100 today.
This is why I'm freaking out. My heart's about to explode out of my chest.
We just do a couple a day.
But we're going to make it happen. Today's episode of the You'll Hear It podcast is sponsored by the Oxford American. Make sure you take a minute to visit oxfordamerican.org/YHI. You'll find all kinds of musical goodies, including a feature on John Coltrane, an interview with Les McCann, a video feature about a lifelong collector of 78 RPMs, and much more. Again, that's oxfordamerican.org/YHI. And be sure to sign up for the Oxford American's e-newsletter so you don't miss out on important music announcements, events, and other musical happenings in the Oxford American universe. Love the Oxford American.
That's right. Today's episode is also brought to you by Folgers. Folgers in your cup.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sump Coffee, and I want to give a huge shout out to my boys over there at Sump who are making it for me every morning.
Show 'em the logo.
My cappuccino.
For the YouTubes.
For the YouTubes. That's the
it's
skeleton.
Scary. Scarier than the coffee.
See the weird thing about the Sump guy?
No.
I took our boy Jay Boogie, John Ellis, there once.
Uh-huh.
Oh, we're
I do
walking
know.
in,
Yeah.
and the guy who owns Sump, the beard, the Sump guy. He's like outside working on some woodworking or something, and he looks at John Ellis and he goes, "John, they know each other. They've known each other for a long time." Anyway, it was really a small world after all kind of thing. Anyway,
Awesome.
We got a speak pipe today.
Oh, man. We are speak piping.
We got a speak pipe from Daniel.
All right.
Hey guys, it's Dan. I wanted to take up the Speak Pipe Challenge. Love the podcast. I wondered if you could talk about your own individual development as pianist, because I feel like you haven't really gone through back from the early days to where you are now, and I wanted to hear about some milestones in your playing, and when you felt like you were progressing, the first tune that you learned, stuff like that. Because I often find that I get in a rut, and so I want to know, how do I make that leap to the next level of piano development and musical development. So thanks very much for your input, and love the show.
Stump, dum, 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 dum. Little milestones.
Little milestones. I like
Yeah.
it. That was your first tune?
No, no way. You know what my first tune that I ever learned was, like, out of a real book?
What?
And it's a weird tune, Easy to Love.
Ooh,
You know
tough
that
one.
tune? It's a tough tune.
Easy to love,
Yeah.
hard to play.
I've had lessons with the icon around here in St. Louis, Carol Beth True.
Yes, as did I.
Yeah, I think every jazz pianist in the last 30 years has started with lessons with Carol Beth. And,
That's right.
She's got a great system for bringing young musicians up. But she gave me Easy to Love as my first real book tune to learn.
Interesting.
And it doesn't, that's not like a logical kind of tune. There's some weird turns in there.
Yep.
Yeah, anyway.
So I think my first tune, even before an official jazz tune, was a song called "Long, Long Ago," a classic in the Suzuki method.
Oh.
Piano and
You're
violin.
going way back. I mean, if we're going way
Well,
back.
it wasn't the first song I played, but it was the first one I tried to make jazzy. Jeremy Davenport, who I was friends with and grew up with from a very young age, 6 or 7, is a trumpet player, great trumpeter in New Orleans,
Yeah.
and we decided to do like a jazzy version because we heard we hadn't even really heard that much jazz. I mean, I'd heard it in my house like on record, but like live jazz. But we had a pretty good like high school jazz band, and we were in middle school. Or we weren't even in middle school; we were still like elementary. But we did a little jazzy version of it, which is like really hilarious, you know. But that was sort of the first attempts at jazz. But then when I was in 7th grade, we organized a little combo. We were in like the stage band at Brittany Woods Middle School, U City. The U, and we not to be confused with the University of Miami, the real U. But we did a song called "Whole Lotta Blues," whole lotta.
It sounds like a bluesy.
It was a bluesy fiasco.
A bluesy fiasco.
And it was written by Marty Page.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
Great arranger, and Yeah, you better go to Google on that one, big guy.
I remember my first like real jazz band tune, Sammy Nestico's "A Warm Breeze."
Oh, A Warm Breeze,
You know
of
that
course.
one?
Yeah, I did that in high school jazz band.
I remember, the trumpet players, maybe the trombone players. They always have a joke back there, but it was like a warm waft, like some kind of
Funny
fart
guys.
joke. Yeah.
So, well, I mean, look, we're going back. These are actually first tunes, but Dan was asking about our individual development with Milestones. And I think those early tunes and those early experiences, even if it's high school band or whatever, are certainly developmental milestones. I think, for me, my development was very much came from just sort of a childhood of being around music a lot in general. So not even, it kind of became about jazz at a certain point, but it was never like, oh, I'm getting into jazz, because I did hear it a fair amount growing up. I didn't grow up in a jazz household, but I heard the music a fair amount. And so when it kind of connected, and I'm sure this wasn't like just at one moment, but it felt like it probably was. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it wasn't. But it's like at whatever time when I was like, wow, I like that. I want, it's kind of like if something is sitting there and you walk by it all the time, you don't think about it. But at a certain point, you're like, wow, that's a nice plant there. I want to be a horticulturist or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen like that. But at a certain point, I connected with it, the sound or something. And I can remember like kind of early things that I heard. But then in terms of trying to play it, like even just trying to be jazzy on the piano, whatever
Totally.
I thought that was. And then for me, it was like my individual development was very much tied in with like a social thing, because my friends were all trying to play. I was very lucky when it came to that, because I was also hanging out with some other group that was not as, when I was coming up, and probably you're a little younger, but maybe you two still, it was like, the late 70s, early 80s, man, it was like a free-for-all. We had bikes, we were riding we were doing a lot of stuff we shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah.
So once we kind of started playing music and we kind of formed a band, then it became about that. I became like obsessive about like, I want to try to play. And that's hard when you're young to learn to play jazz, even if you can play this. So I was like way more developed as a pianist as I was like jazz. I didn't know what like a B flat 7 versus a dominant 7. And like my dad could help me some, but he knew the sound of jazz and he knew music theory, but he was always thinking like a classical theory.
Yeah.
And so he's like, that's the wrong 7th. Make it dominant 7th.
Both your parents are musicians.
Both my parents are musicians,
Yeah.
right.
Your dad played viola here in the St. Louis Symphony for years and years.
Right.
And your mom is a Suzuki
violin teacher. Yeah. And so that was a big part of my development too, like the violin playing coming up in the Suzuki thing, because I learned to play by ear, because she taught very traditional like Suzuki. She studied with Suzuki in Japan.
Cool.
And it was like, you don't learn to read music. It was super hardcore. You learn. I did know how to read because I was doing piano too, but
I think the social element of it is pretty important.
Yeah.
And I think it can really have a huge amount. I always tell people who are asking me, how do I progress in jazz, that you need three things. You need a real curiosity for the music and a desire to want to understand it. You need really good personal instruction, and then you need a community that can help you, that can be like, you should check that out, or you should not do that, or you should check out this band. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
If that's art or painting, or you know what I mean? It's like jazz, whatever. You need that kind of community. And so you are lucky that, the community that you grew up with is like Chris Thomas and Jerry Davenport and like
Todd Williams.
It's like a crazy, crazy group of cats out of U City during that time. It's amazing.
Marty Ehrlich. He was a little older than us, but he came from the same high school, and Ronnie Barrage.
You all just kind of swirled around together. It's great, man.
Yeah.
I had a great community too. Like no one that was like a heavy jazz cat. I was definitely the only one of my friends that were into jazz. There were a lot of like rock and roll guys and metal guys that I was friends with. As Jeffco, you know what I mean? It was like, yeah, totally. But that music is great too, and we would learn all the Van Halen stuff. But for me, it really locked in when I started gigging when I was 15 out in St. Louis here. And then I met other jazz musicians, you know what I mean? And then you find your people close to your age who are like, have you checked out Miles's Plug Nickel? And like, I don't even know what that is.
Right,
and you go and you check it out or whatever. And then you play gigs and you try to do it and you fail miserably, but you're doing it. That I think is a big part in individual development, is who you find to be part of your scene, and then doing it together.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that. At 15 now, coming to St. Louis and doing gigs, that actually was a huge part of my development around the same age. Like I was actually a club right around the corner from here that doesn't exist anymore. When I was I must have been 15. I was playing with Freddie Washington and
playing with Freddie
Willie
this weekend.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like, so that's kind of more like the elders.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
I think that we really both benefited on the St. Louis scene. That's not as heralded. I mean, people that know this is a great community of musicians.
Yeah.
And a very giving and like.
We're lucky to have that. For
yeah,
sure.
yeah. I mean, all the way starting with, Clark Terry and everything from the years of that.
Yeah.
There's been part of the tradition here is of helping the next generation. So I think, having your peers is great, but it's even better when you have a little bit of the elders, because then you actually can hear how it's supposed to be done. When you're with your peers, you're kind of struggling together, which is fun too. But huge parts of my development. There's a few things I think in general, like it's like peaks and valleys, and it's never like, oh, I had this breakthrough and then I was good. I think that's usually more the Hollywood version. But there were some pivotal moments for me in my development. I would just like to. They might be of interest. One, actually, a couple of them were based upon when I was sitting in. I got a chance when I was, I think, like. Maybe 15 or 14, 15, I think I was 15. I had met Wynton Marsalis like the year before through my dad when he played with the symphony. And then he came back. He came back a couple times, but he came back with his own band here. And I kind of kept in touch. He gave me his number. It was like, if you ever have any questions, I was like, cool, I'm going to call him up. And when I came back, he kind of had me play in the dressing room or something, but he asked me to sit in on the gig. Wow. And I was like, what? I was like, oh, this will be cool. But he didn't like say what or whatever, and I didn't even know if it was going to happen, so I was kind of hovering around backstage. And then, at a certain point, halfway or 2/3 way through the show, he's like, right now we like to feature a young up-and-coming pianist, Peter Martin. And I came out and people kind of like, who's this kid? Boo. No, they didn't. But I still didn't know what we were going to play. Yeah. And so I was like, and so he's like, Wynton was like, let's do Softly as in a Morning Sunrise. And I didn't know it. But I think I'd heard it, but either he didn't give me time or I was too sheepish to say it. And so he just sort of started. I was like, whoa. And so that was my first time kind of being under pressure, not knowing something. And I probably had heard it, but after we started, and I think Wynton could tell I didn't really know it, he kind of came over after he played the melody, and I think it was like saxophone soloing, and sort of called out the changes in my ear, But I learned it. So you talk about a milestone for learning to development. But that was, I think, the first time I started to get some confidence in like, wow, I can fake my way through some stuff and still kind of like, so by the time I got to the piano solo, I could kind of get through it or whatever.
Yeah.
And
do you get a standing O?
No, not a standing O, but no booze.
That's good.
So it was right there down the middle.
I don't know about for you. I'm sure this is the case for you, but for me, I was not a great practicer at first. I didn't have a great idea of how to get better and how to practice. And so I think a key for me was when I figured out how to practice to actually make improvements and how to develop a routine like that. And it's always being tweaked and refined. And depending on where you are in your life, it's at different places. But I think that can be a real stepping stone is figuring out how to practice. In a way that actually takes you from where you are to where you need to be. And we've talked about that endlessly on this podcast about different ways to do that. Keep a practice journal, have goals, try to meet those goals, keep a regular appointment at your instrument. All that stuff is huge to making progress and to developing, your individuality.
Yeah, I think that's big. I would second that for sure. That's certainly part of my experience too. The exciting stories and breakthroughs are good, but it's really in terms of personal development, I think on an individual level, it is separate from the community and all that. It's like, when did you start to put in the pieces that actually cause you to have some kind of exponential growth? Because the more you learn and the more you're in a community and you hear really good players and different things, it's like, wow, how am I going to get there to the point I could do that?
Well, I remember when this happened, I think I was senior in high school maybe. And I was always I was always the best pianist wherever I went in high school, right? I wasn't that good, but it was like I had this natural thing for it. So I was not lazy, but I just didn't think I needed to practice as much as I actually needed to practice.
Right.
And I remember going to Spruill's to see Willie Aikens. Remember that?
Yeah.
On a Saturday afternoon, and Montez Coleman was playing, and he was so much better than me. And I sat in, and he basically
now he's in your trio.
No, but he was like, not throwing shade, but it was definitely like, you need to get your stuff together.
Yeah.
And I was talking to him afterwards, and I was like, so what are you doing? He's like, I practice all the time. I'm getting ready to move to New York, and I'm practicing all the time. And I was like, this guy sounds amazing.
You were like, oh, that's a thing?
I was like, yeah, because I figured, like, oh, you're so good, you probably don't practice. Like, that was what was in my mind, right? It's like, you don't need to, because you're just a genius musician. Some BS thing that teenagers tell themselves.
Yeah.
But that was a real turning point as far as like, if you want to be at a top level, you have to work at it every day.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of always known that because I've had some good examples, but I've had to be reminded so many times of that. And I think, you can really start to understand it if you look outside of music. It's very easy to kind of personalize it or make comparisons in terms of what you think that you know. But I mean, go to like an NBA basketball game or a really high level college game and go see how much warm up and stuff is going on by like the best players. And if you think, wow, they're an animal, they're so great or whatever.
Man.
No, they're disciplined.
Fundamental practicing.
Fundamentals, yeah. And so yeah, that's a great thing that we can be doing all the time, of course.
Yeah, having that classical background that your parents have, I'm sure helped with that from a young age. It's a great thing to have for sure.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, it was great.
Keep up the speak pipes. We actually just had one come in as we were talking. Did you know
You're
that?
kidding me.
No, maybe we'll hit that tomorrow.
All right. Well, until tomorrow.
You'll hear it.